Why isn't Puerto Rico a state? Puerto Rico's political status remains a point of ongoing debate and historical complexity. As a U.S. territory, Puerto Rico exists in a unique legal and political limbo. It is neither a U.S. state nor an independent nation. Situated approximately 1,000 miles southeast of Florida, Puerto Rico is a Caribbean archipelago with deep colonial roots and a modern identity shaped by centuries of foreign rule. Today, the island's 3.2 million residents are U.S. citizens and are subject to federal laws. However, they cannot vote in U.S. presidential elections and do not have voting representation in Congress, one of the clearest distinctions between statehood and territorial status. Colonial foundations, Spanish rule. Puerto Rico's colonial story began in 1493, when Christopher Columbus landed on the island's western coast during his second voyage to the Americas. At that time, the land, called Borican by the native Taino people, was swiftly claimed by Spain and renamed San Juan Bautista. Under Spanish control for nearly 4 centuries, Puerto Rico endured severe economic hardship, political repression, and heavy taxation. Over time, these conditions spurred the growth of nationalist movements. In 1868, Puerto Rican revolutionaries launched the Grito de Lares, an armed pro-independence uprising. Although quickly suppressed by Spanish forces, this rebellion became a symbolic turning point. Soon after, Spain abolished slavery on the island and granted limited autonomy, leading to the formation of national political parties. The American takeover. Puerto Rico's relative autonomy under Spain came to an abrupt end in 1898 during the Spanish-American War. On July 25 of that year, U.S. forces invaded the island. By December, the Treaty of Paris had been signed, officially ending the war and transferring control of Puerto Rico from Spain to the United States. This marked the beginning of Puerto Rico's current status as an unincorporated U.S. territory, a designation that continues to shape its legal rights, economic development, and political future. Becoming a U.S. territory. After the United States took control of Puerto Rico in 1898, a military government was established on the island. This system remained in place until April 12, 1900, when the Foraker Act instituted a civilian government. Unlike previous U.S. acquisitions, which typically became states as the country expanded westward and southward, Puerto Rico was classified as an unincorporated territory. This legal distinction meant that the U.S. Constitution only applied in part, and Congress retained broad authority over the island. The rationale behind this designation was shaped by racial and political anxieties of the era. According to Cristina D. Ponce-Krauss, a professor of legal history at Columbia Law School, some U.S. lawmakers feared that granting Puerto Rico statehood would lead to racial integration between white Americans and the largely non-white Puerto Rican population. As a result, Puerto Ricans were denied full political rights and were governed by a U.S.-appointed governor with only limited self-rule. Importantly, they were not granted U.S. citizenship during this period. Granting citizenship, with conditions. Despite the ongoing push by pro-independence groups, the U.S. sought to stabilize the situation by passing the Jones-Shafrath Act in 1917. This legislation granted U.S. citizenship to most Puerto Ricans, but it came with restrictions. While the act established a Puerto Rican Senate and a Bill of Rights, it also maintained Washington's supremacy. The U.S. President and Congress could still veto local laws and retained control over key aspects of governance. The timing of the Jones Act was strategic. That same year, the U.S. enacted the Selective Service Act, requiring military registration for men across the United States and its territories. As a result, nearly 20,000 Puerto Rican men served in the U.S. military during World War I, despite their limited political rights. The shift to commonwealth status. By 1950, amid evolving political pressures, the U.S. Congress authorized Puerto Rico to draft its own constitution. However, this development came with strict conditions. The new document could not alter Puerto Rico's territorial status and had to establish a republican form of government with a Bill of Rights aligned with the U.S. Constitution. Following a constitutional convention, the proposed document was ratified by Puerto Rican voters and later approved by both Congress and the U.S. President. In 1952, Puerto Rico officially became a Commonwealth of the United States, a status that granted more local autonomy but fell short of full statehood or independence. Commonwealth versus free associated state. Even decades after Puerto Rico adopted its Commonwealth status, confusion persists over what this classification actually means. At the time of its creation in 1952, many supporters believed that the Commonwealth designation represented a unique status, neither a state, an independent nation, nor a traditional U.S. territory. The island had a locally elected government and a constitution, which some saw as evidence that Puerto Rico had shed its colonial identity. However, constitutional scholars, including Cristina de Ponce-Kraus, dispute this interpretation. Despite the appearance of self-governance, Puerto Rico's political structure remains subordinate to the authority of the U.S. Congress. Congress retains the ultimate power to override local laws and even alter the island's political framework. In this sense, many experts argue that Puerto Rico remains, in practice, a colonial territory, its Commonwealth status notwithstanding. The confusion deepens when considering the territory's official name in Spanish, Estado Libre Asociado de Puerto Rico, or Free Associated State of Puerto Rico. This term suggests a level of sovereignty that does not exist. Under international law, a free associated state typically refers to a fully independent nation that voluntarily enters into a treaty-based partnership with another country. Puerto Rico does not meet this definition. It is not an independent state, and its relationship with the United States is not governed by mutual agreement but by the authority of Congress. Therefore, the Spanish term is widely regarded by legal scholars and political analysts as a misnomer that inaccurately reflects the island's actual political and constitutional status. Puerto Rico's future. For centuries, the people of Puerto Rico have sought to resolve their political status and move beyond a colonial framework. But deep divisions remain over the path forward. The debate centers on three primary options: full statehood, enhanced Commonwealth status, which would maintain ties with the United States but increase autonomy, or complete independence. According to legal historian Cristina de Ponce-Kraus, the legal process to grant Puerto Rico statehood is relatively straightforward. First, the territory must adopt a constitution consistent with statehood. Then, Congress would review and approve the proposal, potentially attaching conditions to align the new state with the broader U.S. federal system. Following that, Congress would pass legislation formally admitting Puerto Rico as a state. Similarly, Congress could also grant independence through a simple legislative act. In legal terms, the framework is clear. In political terms, however, the situation is far more complicated. In November 2020, Puerto Ricans voted in a non-binding referendum on the question of statehood. Approximately 53% of voters supported the idea, while 47% opposed it. Yet turnout was only 55%, raising concerns about the referendum's representativeness. Supporters of statehood interpreted the results as evidence of majority support, but critics pointed out that referendums are non-binding, often driven by the pro-statehood political party, and fail to reflect the views of all Puerto Ricans. Some opponents of statehood argue that full integration into the United States would erode Puerto Rican identity and culture. Others fear that political assimilation would come without the social and economic benefits that many proponents expect. As Ponce-Kraus notes, legally speaking, it's pretty simple. The battle is over trying to convince people to want statehood or to oppose statehood. Puerto Rico's future remains uncertain, shaped not only by laws and referendums, but by the evolving will of its people and the political climate in Washington. Want to explore more turning points in world history? Subscribe to History Love for in-depth stories, surprising insights, and powerful narratives that bring the past to life. Like, comment, and share if you learned something new, and let us know, what do you think Puerto Rico's future should be?